Let's call this meeting to order. It's 9 o'clock. Go and table down for ourselves.
Christopher Constant.
Dick Trainee.
And coffee.
Tim Potter.
Francis McLaughlin of Planning.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office. Amy Stelmeyer.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. We only have one thing on the agenda, so I guess we're getting right to this one. Let's do business. It's standards on liquor stores. Kind of an odd little title for this. Mr. Potter, sir. Welcome. Are you representing the community council or just a concerned citizen?
A little of both.
Okay.
I'm not the official representative, and I'm not an officer of the community council, but I'm very active in the community council.
Yes, I know.
And wrote the initial resolution and documentation that brought the appeal for any of these mom and pop grocery and liquor, which has now led to a slightly larger discussion item, a bit more general, but very important, that Dan and I have been working on as a result of targeting the first renewal in our area for a while with a, we'll say problem license or operation. So I think we're getting a lot of that under control, and that party's been very responsive. In our opinion, we're working through it as he is told us to do by next Tuesday. And today's discussion is a bit more general about influencing or attempting to have a broader discussion of the issues that have come out of this topic, and maybe trying to address them on a citywide basis.
We're joined by Mr. Peterson. Welcome, Pete.
Morning. Chris.
Thank you.
How you doing? Yeah, I just got behind a whole long line of buses.
School buses?
Yeah.
So this is a draft resolution that attempts to raise the issue, at least to the level of the assembly, that many inebriates and the sale of alcohol and the use of alcohol by some parties within the city is having a pretty deleterious impact on the entire community. The community council can speak for itself and suggest things about the entire city, but this is directly associated with kind of starting point by saying that within the Midtown Community Council area, we want to send a message loud and clear to the assembly that we would appreciate and go on the record that for all new packaged liquor store licenses or renewals thereof in conditional use approvals prior to going to the ABC board for renewal or new licenses, that we would like 50 milliliter shooter bottles and single sale of single beers other than craft beers prohibited. In the discussions with Mr. Lee and Mr. Coffey, one of their concerns is that why me? And that gives a non-level field for all the players. And what we have looked at and indicated is that we have to start somewhere. The conditional use process and the licensing is a rolling 2-year program, and it's our intent to, as each one comes up, we will go to the assembly and ask you to impose similar conditions. In working with Dan and his client, it's understandable that he doesn't want to be singled out as the one that gets dinged. And if he raises prices, marks his bottles and everything, he's still got everybody else in and around the area and even across the street selling the same product. So this is an attempt to address the issue on a larger basis and even the playing field so that it's level. We can speak for ourselves from a community council standpoint, but we'd also, as encouraged here, that you consider this across the entire community, because this is a pervasive problem. And it's not just in Fairview, it's not just in Midtown, it's not just in Mountain View, it is all the way to South Anchorage and everywhere you go. So that's really the essence of what we're
Dan?
talking.
Yeah, as you all know, I've been probably close to 40 years doing this kind of
what my goal here is pretty similar. I've been in this thing all my life, and it's, what I see around us is just absolutely appalling, and I wish we could specifically address the nature of it. But one of the suggestions that has come, and one of the concepts that's come, is to limit the availability of certain types of alcohol, which are basically cheap and easily to acquire.
Throwaways. They're throwaways, Dan.
Yeah, well, they throw everything away. There's no exception to what they discard in our parks and on our streets and so on. But nonetheless, there are things like...
We've been joined by Mr. Fred Dyson. Go ahead, Dan, I'm sorry.
And that's okay. So what I suggested at the assembly meeting, a month ago, whenever it was, when this process started before you fellas, was that we can't just say, pick on this guy and then go down the street and pick on that guy. We've got to do a more holistic thing. And I suggested that we have this kind of a discussion about citywide. Tim and I, of course, he's limited because he's the Midtown Community Council and I'm representing a client. So our discussion, and what Tim has written as his resolution, is basically focused on Midtown. But if we adopt that and we adopt the MOU, Midtown will be addressed. Whether it will alleviate the problem or not, we don't know. But my client and I and Tim and his counsel are ready to try it. And it may be appropriate to say, okay, this is a 6-month trial. We'll see what happens in this town and in this section of town, and send it off. If you really wanted to hit it as hard as you could, and if you keep a level competitive playing field for everyone who sells alcoholic beverages, then you can perhaps alleviate the problem. I'm worried that it will just, it'll make it so they have to pay more, buy more, do more things to get alcohol, but these people aren't going to quit drinking just because we get rid of shooters and raise the prices and so on and so forth. But we have two things. We have the small matter the little one, my client's matter that comes up in front of you on the 22nd. I think Tim and I are within that much of getting an agreement between us as to what should happen. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was sort of phasing it to give you guys an opportunity to act, and then if you do, then we can take more on for us because we won't just be, subsidizing everybody else's business in the neighborhood. So we're looking at that. But our discussions will continue, and we should have both an agreement and a resolution before you for the 22nd. But today is how far can your reach go, and what should you require? And we both have ideas about what should be required, and my hope is it quickly becomes citywide, but at a minimum, please address it in the neighborhood where my client does business.
Pete?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My question is actually for Dean. Could we retroactively change the rules on these liquor stores so that they can't sell the smaller bottles with a higher alcohol content beer? Is that sort of retroactive, or do we have to do it as each renewal comes up?
Or each application comes in.
Or each application.
Yeah, so I understand what you mean by retroactive. I can't really picture retroactive in sales of shoes, last month. But I think we need conditional use permits that are already issued to modify, and now going forward prohibiting shooter size liquor containers. And yes, code provides for the assembly's authority to modify conditional use permits for alcohol and marijuana. I think those are the two I'm aware of. There might be others, but to modify them based on public interest and public safety issues. So that's not a direct quote, but the language then. So we can modify conditions on conditional use permit for alcohol. I think that you would want to do so carefully with a very reasonable, substantiated basis.
Okay, great, thank you.
Chris?
No, I was just thinking the same thing, but I think that Dean addressed it. It's not that it's retroactive, but we could do it on licenses that were already renewed for their 2-year cycle this year, is what I just heard. And so, because what I would think we would want to do is, if we were to do it, set it out at a time specific point in the future to allow people who have certain products, who are in the business, to eliminate that through their sales, and then move forward. So we wouldn't want to just do a black line. We'd want to be reasonable.
That's the goal. I would like to see, from my perspective, since this is my area, I would like to see it apply to this one to begin with. But I'd like, Dean, you to come up with what the vehicle we need to use to make this area-wide. But we have to do it one community council at a time right now, because I'm not sure I could get it passed citywide or would have done it years ago. Yes, Dan?
What Tim and I have been talking, what Tim and I have been saying is that you gotta give them a notice that if you fail to do this, then there will be impacts on your license and on your conditional use. You know, you've got that. The beauty of the conditional use, of course, is it's all within your purview.
Yeah.
The protest goes to the ABC board, and they may or may not agree with it.
But the conditional use is ours.
Francis,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Francis has it.
Francis? Then Mr.
I
Dyson.
wanted to, before Francis spoke, if I may,
Go ahead, Dean.
just to clarify, there's a difference between conditions added to a liquor license that the ABC board choose and those conditions. And there was, I think we were related to the operations and sales and so forth. And it's covered by 7 authorized trading. And there's a difference between that and conditional use permits. And like Mr. Coffey said, conditional use permits, you have to require notice periods and everything. And they're more related to land use. And I guess what we're talking about is a little in between these two. So, but we need to really distinguish and carefully think of which approach we're going to use for restricting the types of containers and sales.
Okay. Francis, then Mr. Dyson.
I have several thoughts that I just wanted to express that put out there for everyone's
Consideration.
consideration and discussion. I guess my first thought was if you wanted to apply additional rules to alcohol serving businesses throughout the municipality, it seems like you would write regulations that might be in Chapter 10 related to alcohol licenses, and that would apply community-wide rather than attach them to licenses and then expect that the state enforce those special conditions. So an example of this is downtown in Title 10 has special rules that apply to liquor stores in downtown, and it doesn't apply to other parts of the municipality. So rather than attaching it to licenses, you could just make these, if you wanted these rules to be applicable across the community, then you could make them regulations, and it wouldn't live in the Title 21, the zoning code. It would be in the licensing section of our title. So some other thoughts is that some people buy shooter bottles before they want to spend big money on a big bottle of liquor. So there is a place for shooter bottles. I mean, if you want to buy an expensive bottle of tequila that's $50 or $70, maybe you want to buy a little shooter bottle and try it before you. So there could be a legitimate customer reason to want to buy a shooter bottle other than being some sort of indigent, person with an alcohol problem, right? I think you should think about who will be responsible for enforcing this, and do they have the resources to enforce these sorts of things. I think that the rules that you come up with, are only going to be temporary because over time there are new products and inflation and prices. So if you say, no alcohol, no alcohol sales of a purchase price less than $10 or something like that. Well, that may work for today, but like in the case of Spirits of Alaska, all those rules that were like those special rules on shooter bottles and prices and all of that became 20 years old, had no applicability, now because they were still serving this problem population or whatever, but those rules didn't have any teeth anymore because there were other products and prices had gone up, and so those rules became meaningless. So these would need to change over time. So AMCO doesn't actually do any enforcement, right? They've got like 4 or 5 enforcement guys. 8 for the whole state.
They also lost federal funding a while back, Francis. They don't
Yeah.
have the money to do anything anymore.
That's what I was just going to get into.
Seriously, Dan, they used to do.
Well, they may have lost federal funding, but they're
But
still spending a
they
lot of
used
money all over
to,
the
Dan, they
state.
used to have money to do spot investigations. They have no money, according to Erica McConnell. They've got nothing to do that now. It was a federal grant.
That's exactly right. So the federal grant went away, and so the only sort of enforcement, really, I mean, this is kind of oversimplifying it, was these underage compliance checks. That was through a federal program. The grant went away. The AMCO is trying to bring that back under their own budget and some money, even though they don't have that grant anymore. These underage compliance checks, that's their sort of enforcement, is to stop, you know, underage sales by having these sting operations with someone that looks like they're a teenager, you know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, a couple more thoughts. So, you know, there are good operators and there are bad operators. Good liquor store owners and bad liquor store operators. And so you have, I don't know, something like Talbot Chang and Winehouse, you know, Anchorage Winehouse or La Bodega or whatever. Like, you know, they have expensive products and their clientele are, you know, people who are, you know, snooty or connoisseurs that are spending like a premium for special sort of things, right? And they don't have this, I mean, they're just totally above it. They don't have this problem with serving, I don't know, homeless people on the corner. But then there are operators that will sell to anyone and cater to that population. And the best example of that is Spirits of Alaska, which I know Mr. Constant knows all about. And so you have to ask yourself, like, which operators intend to be good neighbors and participate in the community and provide a, you know, a desired, you know, shopping opportunity, in which sort of create problems. And there are operators that create problems, and those sort of give a black eye to the whole industry. And then if you start to try and regulate the bad operators by applying these restrictive rules to all liquor stores, you sort of punished all liquor stores or package stores because of these bad operators. So you might consider a different tack of just dealing with bad operators and not taking the worst sort of things and applying it to all, you know, all of the businesses. Because, you know, I mean, there are some bad businesses, there's some bad, you know, good businesses. And we've seen them. You know, there was In-N-Out Bush Liquor #2 across from, you know, Blaine's Art Studio, and that it's now Captain Sparrow. But those operators, they were just set like Spirits of Alaska, and they were just selling to, you know, homeless people or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I never went in there and purchased liquor before. Maybe there were, you know, other people like me that did, but we know that the people that they were selling to created this huge problem for all those businesses, and they, you know, it was dangerous. Mom and pop liquor, you know, has a track record of not being a good neighbor, right? There's that article in the newspaper. I heard about them long before all of that. You know, the community council reached out to them and said, hey, you know, we want you to start carrying some things that we would buy. We would like you to come to the community council and work with us and become a better business. They expressed no interest in any of that. You know, this is a place, you know, under a previous owner that they were known for selling to underage people. This is just a business that was a bad operator. They're just a bad operator. So now you're thinking, because of that bad operator, you now want to change the rules for all liquor stores across the municipality. So, I don't know, think about that.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Mr.
be
Dyson.
careful what you say, sir, because I've been working with them and they're not, so there.
Mr. Dyson, sir.
They just happen to come into the gallery, shooting gallery.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
So I've often said that the social problems, neighborhood problems, are most closely related to where there's walk-up traffic, you know, and so that's a pretty localized impact. And the other problems are with bad operators. So if we're going to say to someone, because you live, you work, your business is in this location where you're getting a lot of walk-up traffic, i.e. homeless folks, we've got special rules for you. It's kind of like banks, redlining districts, you know, and is that legal for us to do? And we heard at other meetings that businesses, other package stores say, wait a minute, don't do that to me, you know. Well, the one we put the restrictions on, you know, and so on, they say, if you put those restrictions on me, the customers will walk 3 extra blocks to this other store, you know, that doesn't have it. So you're putting me in an unfavorable competition situation. So I think you already just asked the question, can we pick out a specific one and do it at other than license renewal time? And the answer was yes. Is that correct? Yeah, we can do that. And with notice and perhaps a way to appeal that decision. You know,
If they can afford it, yeah.
I know you're very expensive.
Yeah, you're right, I am.
Is there a shooter version of you too?
Say?
Is there a version of you that's a shooter?
50
Less
milliliter.
costly, 50 milliliters? Don't worry about that. Anyway, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, so do we want to do both? Be able to do a local restriction where there's walk-up traffic that's causing an impact in the neighborhood, and secondly, do it for bad operators. Back in the day when I was working on bad bars on 3rd and 4th, we put the operator on notice. This is where I started in my thoughts. So can we say to what we perceive to be a problem location, can we say the criteria for putting this on is the number of police calls, you know, and so on in that neighborhood? And so it's on the basis of documented problems. And Mr. Gates, would you speak louder
Hello, Amy.
when you speak?
Thank you.
We've been added. Amy Dabowski's joined the meeting. Tim, you're next, and then Chris.
There's a whole list of things now that I'd like to try and address, and everything that everybody has said has some basis of truth in it. As far as going backwards, the police calls, in looking at the way that they are reported, I can't figure out to a specific address if those calls are specifically about that facility. In this case, it's in a mall. The mall has a single address, and all these calls go to that address, but may not be that operator. And it also penalizes the party from calling APD. So we've actually asked Eddie, because of this issue, that, you know, here's the report. You decipher this and tell me what it really means. We are either collecting our data inappropriately, but there is no way to translate the data that is collected and the way it's presented and determining whether there's a bad operator at a specific location from the way that it's collected and printed out. So we've talked about they're going to independently come monthly to our meetings and have a report. They'll have a standing position on the community council agenda, and they are going to give a report on all the calls that they made, anything else that happened, because if they're going to comply and change and become a good neighbor, we don't want them to get penalized for taking actions that allow them to be a good neighbor. And the system has some catch-22s in it that are kind of problematic, and that needs to be addressed on a broader scale. So you have liquor licensing through the state, and you've got conditional uses through the city. The city's conditional uses, and you've got a variety of conditional uses that are allowed within the code. And many of them have specific standards. Sky bridges, you go there is a specific set of standards for sky bridge location and design in things. You could do the same thing with a conditional use for packaged liquor sales, that it could have products that are prohibited as part of the structure of the actual conditional use. It will take time because that is going to change Title 21 and give some specific standards, but that's another approach to it. There could be passage of this in an amortization period so that the people can sell out that stock or whatever they need to do and then come into compliance. But something needs to happen. And, you know, we've identified in our 2020 plan and the 2040 land use plan map certain areas that we want to have densified and more residential uses associated with job centers and employment centers. It's in our plans, we set it, we established what the goals are, and in your discussion about walk-up, that's how the city wants to develop in the future, that we need to get ahead of some of this problem. And, you know, I am not so naive that I'm gonna think that taking shooters off the shelves and isolating and not selling 8% beer for 99 cents for a 24-ounce can or whatever, that's going to solve the problem. It's a much bigger problem, and this community needs to get its act together. And if the state doesn't want to participate, then we've got to do it on our own. And if there's an additional sales tax on alcohol, and that funding goes directly to addressing these problems and doing enforcement, so it's not on a complaint basis.
I tried that, Tim, okay? They're gonna get to vote on it again next year, but go ahead.
And it's not.
I don't give up.
It's not isolated anymore. It is all across town.
Yep.
And when it moves from one place, it just moves to another place. So if you address it in one place, but we have to start somewhere. I would love to say that Eddie has agreed to take a leadership role and is voluntarily gonna not sell shooters and not sell single beers. But he's also running a business and trying to make ends meet. And when in and out, just, you know, a couple 100 feet away, is doing the same thing or worse, you know, it is an issue. It needs to be on a broad-based approach. And I think with some allowance of time, some standards that are developed, that it can be done. I mean, Francis brings up some good points that things always change. Well, yeah, things always change, and we as a community need to be able and intent enough about the issues to address those as they come up. Comp plan is a living document, the code should be a living document, and we as a community are the ones that are supposed to be making the rules. You put the laws into place, and then we have to have some way to enforce. Just like if we didn't have police, it would be a different town. We've all experienced that. But in Midtown, which is where I live and where I work, and I have to deal with it every day, shooters and single beers are evidenced by debris that seems to be the issue. Now, they may change things, but 50 milliliters is just a hair over an ounce and a half. And when I can go begging on the corner and get $5 and go to a liquor store and buy 7.5 ounces of hard liquor for $5, actually a little bit less than $5, $4.95, I can get pretty, you know, pardon my language, shit-faced on 7.5 ounces of hard liquor. And it doesn't cost very much. And that appears to be the problem. Not only are they very hideable, they're small, they're easy to carry, they don't put big soldiers in your pocket. You know, if Wall Street drunks had to carry around a gallon jug, you know, then we'd have a pretty good idea what that bulge is, because they're probably not all pregnant. So that's really part of the issue.
So I have a slate of
Go ahead.
thoughts.
Are you done, Tim? Chris?
Yeah, so, you know, last 3 nights I've been watching the Ken Burns documentary on Prohibition. It was a very interesting watch, and I think his conclusion was that coming up with a solution that hits everybody all at once in the same way is actually what led us to a culture of crisis in the Prohibition era, because people were going to responsibly drink, and in fact they were going to do it in their own way and couldn't stop them. So I'm at once cautious about broad prohibitions because of the ramifications that come from that. But then Mr. Dyson puts forward a very smart idea, I think, which is a two-prong approach, which is one that is specific to problem operators and at the same time one that is specific to problem areas. And coming up with a set of standards that are driven by a number of variables. It could be partly police calls, it could be partly community council reports, it could be partly just street trouble. Any number of variables that we could account for that would not be arbitrary, but in fact could be demonstrable of what this actual problem is. So that in those areas where you have communities asking for help, you can do a geographic approach. I think there's some very stout wisdom in this idea, because then you're not targeting everybody everywhere, and you're allowing the problem to be addressed specifically and areas specifically. So I think there's something to contemplate there. APD generates what I call a heat map for their calls, not specific to an address. So you can see where areas are hot just by the color of the region around the area, which I found a very effective tool for understanding how the problem areas are actually working. Because I personally wouldn't want to harm La Bodega or any of those operators like Crush, who are doing amazing things and providing products, because I'm a little snooty. I like it if I'm going to have a drink to be a nice drink, because I drink rarely. And so I think we need to be both careful and wise and at the same time aggressive at figuring this out. So I think a two-pronged approach might not be the worst idea.
Okay, I'll get you, Francis. Dean, and then Francis. Dean?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to say two things. One was, earlier when I spoke, we were talking about individual licensees and how to regulate them in that conditions. But we also have, of course, I'm sorry, Fred, speak up. So earlier when I was talking about adding conditions, it was about adding those individual licensees. But listening to how we have maybe an area problem, and I mean not quite area-wide, I think that a good approach here is what Francis mentioned, looking at Title 10 and the downtown area restrictions. Is if we want to have like hot zones where we need to have restrictions, because the area is concentrated in this, the problem is concentrated in the area. Many single shooters, litter all over the place and stuff like that. That might be a better approach. I would suggest that the committee consider an ordinance amending Title 10 for this kind of issue, maybe at next month's meeting. So I guess I'm assigning myself a project.
Well, you are before I ask you to do it, but go ahead, Dean.
You can see it
Because
coming.
you know I will.
I knew you were going to ask me.
Yes.
So, and then the second thing I wanted to mention was about enforcement. And Francis is right that we have to consider who's going to enforce these things. And we have a strong group of volunteers from some community councils, which is great. But they don't do enforcement. They have enforcement powers. Observe and report and document the problems and issues. But enforcement, of course, is the government's responsibility. You've got the state and municipality. And I wanted to mention I've been investigating an issue of a state statute and regulation. It says liquor licenses and the fees paid to the state or to be refunded to a municipality that takes active enforcement of the Title IV and the error conditions attached to licenses. So I'm not sure if the municipality's been receiving that money from the state, and if we haven't, I'm going to make sure that we follow through and get it. But that's supposed to fund our enforcement efforts. So I think that also the state, in talking to them, like I said, they only have 8 enforcement officers statewide, but they prefer to have the local government do more of the enforcement efforts. And we are in some discussion from time to time now about how that's supposed to operate, how that's supposed to work. So it's still an ongoing conversation, but I think we're supposed to have some funding for that from the state and a program to do more active local enforcement.
Okay. I've got a few more people, and I got to let the body know too. We're going to lose both Dan Coffey and Tim at 10 o'clock on the nose. Before I go on to Francis, Chris, and Pete, are you guys working, you think you'll be able to work out something for the body by the 22nd of May?
We've kind of committed to each other, but
Okay.
it's gonna be a long weekend.
Because I know we want to look at the overall problem, but I'd like to deal with just on the 22nd, this particular license. I've got to deal with it. And here's my other problem, Tim, in Midtown, is we've got a Sears store going away, and I hear Cars wants to go into there. My fear is they're going to want a liquor store there. And what you're going to have then is the drunks that can buy in Fred Meyer, the ones that could buy at this store, whatever it's going to be, right there on the New Surrey Highway in Northern Lights. And that tears up my community council in Rogers Park, and I'm not going to let that happen. So anyway, Francis, go ahead.
Thank you for calling on me, Mr. Chair. I wanted to support the things that Dean said. That my opinion is that prices for alcohol and hours of operation should not be regulations in the zoning code in Title 21, like regulations for skywalks and other sort of land uses. That they seem more appropriate to be in Chapter 10 or Title 10, the clerk's office's licensing regulations and the code governing alcohol establishments. That was my point.
Thank you, sir. Chris?
Yeah, just back to this idea of the two-pronged approach. I know that you want to do this citywide, and I think this is the way to do it citywide. Because if you approach a citywide, non-targeted, non-area specific approach, you'll never get it passed where it gets to everybody everywhere. But if you create a policy that allows specific communities to request tighter restrictions on their area, right, then it's more responsive to the local communities. So in effect, it's citywide, but as requested, as opposed to directed down onto people. The folks who are impacted by these problems are never silent, right? They're the ones who are impacted and feel the negative impacts are the ones coming forward. And so I think that we've struck upon an opportunity here to achieve your goal, but without the heavy hammer of everybody must do this. Instead, it's everybody who wants this can have this opportunity, right? And I think that's a way to frame this and where you can get 6 votes and no legal challenge.
Thank you. Pete? Then
Thank you,
Amy.
Mr. Chairman. And so, just to follow up on that, Chris, I don't know, I'll get back to that in a minute, but I was going to talk about enforcement, because obviously we can make rules, but if no one enforces them, then the owners are going to slide back to what they were doing before, and then we'll be right back to where we started from. And some of this started when the legislature, and I'm sure Mr. Dyson probably remembers this, they moved enforcement of liquor laws to the Department of Commerce. And that actually wasn't an accident. They knew that the Department of Commerce would do less enforcement, and so that's why they moved it over to there.
And out of the Department of Public Safety, which is the
Correct.
troopers and the police.
Right. So, so enforcement is something that we're going to have to
Step into if we want to do it.
figure out, Anyway.
Thank you.
If nothing else, if the assembly takes an action that says they're going to focus on this attention and attention on the issue, and there's going to be a come to Jesus moment sometime in the future, then it may be that the industry will finally step up and try and even the way itself kind of enforce through encouraging good operations, because sometimes the only times things actually get changed is from the inside out. And if the industry can put pressure because they're worried about impacts on them, there might be a better discussion and dialogue between all of the operators to actually help crack down on the issue.
Amy?
I just remembered what it was that I forgot.
Okay.
So, what I think might possibly be something that we could work out, and I think it was something Chris was talking about. You know, pick a community council area out and say, if your business is within this community council area, then these are the new regulations, what you're allowed not to carry in your inventory. And then, obviously, what's gonna happen is the other community councils in town are gonna see that happened, and then they're gonna petition to have that done in their areas. And so we'll do it,
Piece by piece?
Piece by piece, an area at a time, and that actually might work.
And that's kind of why we brought this forward and said if nothing else, Midtown is going to be the test platform.
I appreciate
for this
that.
to happen.
We used to do geographic rezoning in this town, back in the 80s, early 90s. Rather than just when issues came up, they'd come up rezonings in an area. We'd have the meeting here, because our rezoning doesn't happen just in that area. We look at how it would impact the whole neighborhood. And the city got away from doing that a while back. Yes, Francis?
So this is a little bit contrary to the discussion here, but I think that the bad operators won't follow any rules that you establish, and that if you establish rules for areas, then you'll be applying rules to the good operators who will follow them. Bad operators are not going to follow the rules. So example of Spirits of Alaska, it had all these special rules, didn't follow any of them. The people that worked there were selling to whoever they wanted to, and in some cases engaging in
Illegal transactions.
activity with alcohol or
Over the
with
counter.
drugs and that sort of thing. It was a crime hub, but they were a bad operator. They didn't follow the rules that were established, the regulation, their special restriction attached to their conditional use. They had no intention of doing that. They actually had a belief that they were doing a community service by selling to street people and that, because then that negative impact they were creating was localized to that area and wasn't gravitating to other parts of town. And they have an interest in selling to these people, or they did, because according to what people that work there told me, is that their job was to make money for their bosses and that, for the business. So they believed they had an interest in selling to everybody, even if they were like street people or whatever, and created a huge problem to the neighboring architecture firm, Innovision, and the other businesses and other residences in the neighborhood. So just be careful when you by creating rules that apply not just to one particular bad operator, but apply them to all the operators, good and bad. I don't know that you solve the problem, because all you've done is apply new rules that the good operators will have to comply with, the bad operators didn't comply with before, and that you can't expect them to do it again.
Thank you. Mr. Bowski, man.
That's exactly why you have enforcement, right? So
You gotta have enforcement.
I mean, I sat through all the Spirits of Alaska discussions. I don't remember anywhere on the record that it was the people that worked at Spirits of Alaska that actually sold drugs. I think the selling of drugs was in the parking lot.
Nope.
But I
There's
do.
one over-the-counter deal they had on film.
Really?
Well, I don't remember that at all.
Go ahead, Amy, you've got the
I
floor.
sat through the hearings, but anyways, I think it's really, I urge caution in claiming something like that unless you have proof. And I remember the video of APD in the parking lot. I don't remember something over the counter. So I just want to say that. But regardless, I think Francis brings up a good point. Enforcement's important. And I think if you have rules, they should be enforced. Otherwise, you're going to have people that don't follow them. I mean, we've seen this with other industries too, and I think that's important. But I want to go back to the concept of regional hotspots, and I think it's important for governments to not only address issues that are hot within a certain region, but be nimble enough to address them if they move to another region. So I'm very sensitive to the fact that, listen, right now in my community, we don't have this issue, which I'm very thankful for. The operators in my community seem to be very proactive. I mean, I've been before sitting in the car when my husband went in to buy beer and somebody came out to ask for my license. And so...
They thought you were under 18.
Yeah. And so...
That's a compliment.
Yes, and she smiled broadly.
I know. So I recognize it could change, but I don't want to punitively, in my view, punish the operators in my community because they appear to be compliant with all laws, and it's not necessary at this point.
And no demonstrable problem.
Exactly.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. What do you
Sir.
want to accomplish by the time we quit today?
I want to have resolution on this. These two guys are working towards resolution with the MOU. They'll have it in front of us on the 22nd.
All right.
I'm just concentrated on this one license right now. We can look long-term, area-wide if you want to do that, but just today on this one.
Yeah,
we
so I
tell them.
respectfully suggest we limit our,
We've got 10 minutes left with these two gentlemen.
so that we either up or down on this. Excuse me for interrupting.
It's okay.
Good, Amy.
When it comes to that concept, I think Dean brings up a very important point, and Francis brings up this point. We should look at that, and I'm supportive of that concept. But I just want to put it on the record, as I did, I think, at the last assembly meeting. I think a regional swath of the entire city of Anchorage, including Chuyak Eagle River, just to say we need to just ban all shooters and ban this and ban that, I think is too far. And I want to say that. With respect to this error that's in front of us, I apologize. I had a constituent meeting that ran late today, so I didn't get to hear part of the conversation. So I feel ill-equipped at this point to say whether I support this error yet or not, just because I have to go back and listen to the tape to hear what was the first part of the conversation. But I appreciate the conversation.
Okay, gentlemen, we've got 10 minutes left. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I
10.
just have, first of all, I, as you know, I do a lot of work for the ABC board as well. Bob Klein is very, he ran Baron Jug, and before that he ran the Pars liquor stores. He's very receptive to telling Erica where she needs to put her resources. And I also know they have 8 inspectors, and 5 of them are in Anchorage. And there's enough resources there adequately positioned where we can rely on them for some help, okay? Particularly in a rather short term as this thing's being implemented. That's number one. Number two, I think where Tim and I are going is my guy will agree to do this today, and as soon as you guys do that, whenever that is, then we'll step to that higher level of compliance with the new set of circumstances. Because it's going to take 2-3 months or so, I would expect, for Dean to produce it, you guys to have hearings, then adopt, and so on. Whatever it takes, once it's adopted, we'll comply with more stringent conditions. And my question is, how long is it going to take us to get there? I don't know, but that's for Dean, of course. But, we will reach an agreement. We will bring it to you on, hopefully,
I'll leave the body in May.
Monday, so you can look at it. We'll file it with the clerk, and we'll have a deal. My guy is amenable, and we'll have a deal.
He seems to have been very responsive and understands now that he and his family's license, or conditional use anyway, are in jeopardy, and have been brought up to a certain level of exposure. Probably the most difficult issue to deal with is him not being necessarily willing to be on an unlevel field. So he does not want to be banned unless everybody else is as far as selling shooters. He has voluntarily agreed to increase the prices on shooters and to not sell single beers, and mark all of his shooter products and possibly some of the...
Where it's coming from, Tim, is that what he's going to do? Mark them so we can tell?
So that yesterday we met, and I had photos of all of the shooters that I picked up outside of his building, in the parking lot and on the side of the building, the night of the assembly hearing. So we actually went through all that yesterday. One of the probably 6 or 7 shooter bottles wasn't even a brand that he carries. So there really does need to really show and demonstrate what the issue is and who's responsible. There does need to be some time taken to try and let him prove up that it's not his fault. It's hard to believe that people are coming from a few hundred feet away and drinking the shooter that they buy it in and out, and then dropping it within 30 feet of the front door of Eddie's place. But he contends that he's not the one selling the stuff that's being dumped right outside his door. We had a long discussion about how I don't necessarily buy into that, but he he is willing to mount additional cameras, keep the records of that film. He will go out once a week and bag all the garbage that is in litter on every street, not just around his place, but all the way to the park. He will mark his bottles and do that over a period of time, 3 or 4 months, so that the community council can have our meetings at least 3 consecutive meetings. And let's look and see what happens. What do we find out? He might find out himself, holy crap, I must be selling to a bunch of straw buyers that I didn't realize were straw buyers. And I think that's happening around town as well. I know it is.
Mr. Coffey, comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one other thing, that Tim's outlined it pretty good, but he basically, we had our agreement to date from my client was never sell more than 2 shooters bottles to any one customer. So you limit it to basically 1.6 ounces, so you're limited to 3 ounces, 3.5 ounces of alcohol. And if it's two per customer, and apparently I stood in the store and observed a bunch of stuff on 2 different occasions. And you see a lot of people buy 1 in a beer, two of them in a beer. I saw one couple that had 4 and a couple of beers, but it appeared, and then they leave the store and then they get in their car. So I mean, we watched and drove away. We didn't see anyone that you could readily identify as a chronic public inebriate, but I'm only in there for maybe an hour and a half or so, but it's still, it's anecdotal. But I think what Tim said is true. I think we got their attention loud and clear, because I've told them from the get-go, you're going to have to do some things. I don't know what they'll be in the beginning, but we're getting there, and we'll have it there. And then if you step it up, we'll step it up without question. Okay, but we'd ask that you do it quickly, and that you give time to get your stuff into effect before you put it entirely on us. That's all. Thanks.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for working together, because it helps the community out.
Dan made it very clear in our parting comments at our meeting yesterday that, Eddie, this is your chance to sign, and if you don't, I'm not going to be there to help you. And Dan was very clear, and you're on your own, and if you get shut down or impose conditions on, that's because you failed.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen. Chris?
Thanks. So, just to sum it up, the intent is that we aren't really reviewing this ordinance per se today. What we're doing is we're going to get a final proposed version back from you guys for the conditions that will be
22nd.
inserted for us to deliberate next week or whatever happens. So we aren't really considering this today anymore. What we're seeing is a good faith effort from both parties to address the question. So I'm going to go back to the other conversation. My concern is that whatever criterion that get established, if we do this geographic area approach, is that the criteria aren't just complaint driven, but it has to be evidence based. And so we have to come up with some standards for what the evidence is, because I know that there are some communities that will just complain because they don't want liquor in their neighborhood. And I know for some that's a good reason, but for me I want evidence. And to the idea of the move to commerce, I think this is reality, and that we also have that same process in place here. This is where we deliberate rules of liquor license issues. And while the Public Safety Committee is sometimes the venue, this is the place. And I have an issue that we'll be bringing forward from my neighborhood to this committee relating to the Brown Bag Sandwich Company. I'm going to try to shift the venue and take it a little bit out of the heat of police and power and put it more into the frame of business. And is this good for your business? And how are you going to make this good for your business and good for the neighborhood? And so I see that change coming, and I think that it's locally a good change. So thank you.
Amy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate Mr. Potter's conversation, because I'm starting to understand the flavor of this now, and I agree with Mr. Constant. The fact that there is some discrepancy or assertions based on anecdotal evidence is troubling, especially in this particular area when you have other liquor establishments that potentially could be adding to what's happening in that community. So the fact if it's localized to these smaller serving sizes that are being sold, I think especially the data points that I need are who are they coming from? And so if they're having to label these, then we'll know. There's no more discrepancy. Adding more cameras, I like that approach before we come in with a heavy-handed approach, singling out one operator. Now, he happens to be the first license in this particular area, so the others, I suspect, are gonna go through the same thing. But the fact that we're gathering evidence and data before we come down and say, okay, you are the problem, I think is important. It shows our deliberative process, so I really appreciated those comments.
I can promise that I personally will
Oh, I know you will.
bring forward everyone that comes up.
I knew you would.
And in and out and across the street, which is also an issue. But Dan, I've almost got Dan agreed to, we're gonna dress up and go sit in Garden Street Park and Springer Park.
This'll be
and
interesting.
sit down and talk with the inebriates and ask them, what do you drink?
And have a couple of shooters or
Yeah.
something.
So,
I would like to go with you.
Get that on film.
yeah, so.
Especially if he goes with you guys. I want on
I know you
film.
have to
That
move
sounds
very
like a new
quickly.
reality show, you
I know you
know?
have to move quickly, and my thought is, since we already have, many of us have the belief that we're gonna start addressing this area specifically in this area, this issue in this area. Have you already approached In and Out and the other liquor stores that are really close, saying, you guys might wanna proactively start labeling your stuff? You might,
We have not. I have been in here several times as a buyer to look at how they operate. And I think they're part of the problem as well, clearly. And some of the smaller, Francis is like, there's good operators and there's bad operators, and the bad operators will probably always be bad operators. We might be able to turn some of them to become better operators. Eddie now, I think, is going to become a much better operator. I'm pretty confident because he knows that I'm not going away. So, but the industry itself has to also self-impose some pressure.
One last
I think
thing.
you're
Oh, I'm
right.
sorry.
Yes, Mr.
I was
Coffey.
very careful in this language to make sure that, and I don't know if they could sell shooters or not. My wife's complaint to me was that, well, when I'm cooking and I want to use a small amount of alcohol, I don't want to buy a fifth. I said, well, too bad, because it's a big problem. I mean, you're going to have to buy a fifth and have a party, I guess, I don't know. But everybody needs to understand, so I put in on the bottles of beer, because when I go to a and buy a 6-pack of beer, it's usually a mixed bag of different beers.
You looking for a motion, Mr. Chairman?
What?
Are you
No,
looking
we
for-
don't need a motion right now.
So,
I want
These
you-
two are leaving
I'm
together.
going to tell you one thing about Eddie Lee. He's a 25-year-old man and recently graduated from college and came back and has been running his parents' business for a relatively short period of time. He's had one hell of an education in the last, say, 2 months, 3 months. And so if this young man is how I read him, and I certainly make a lot of mistakes, I think we've got to convert to responsible sales of alcohol. And Tim and I will make sure he stays that way, we hope.
but he does want to play on a level playing field.
Good. We know years ago, Mr. Tish and I required a liquor store downtown to put where they were selling the liquor from. They had to stamp every bottle. And it was interesting when we found those bottles showing up. They said at first it wouldn't work. It did work. We could tell where the bottles were from. It does work. Thank you guys for being
Before
here.
you guys go, one thing that hasn't been brought up that you're effectively doing, but I would like to ask you to consider formalizing it, is adding the language of having an MOU between the community council and the operator. This is a thing that we are finding to be a very effective tool, and it's not set in the requirements, and I would like to see you guys come forward and add that to your conversation at least.
Well, we don't have any problem with that.
Right.
Eddie has promised to go to every community council.
And I would like to see that written out in some way that's formalized between you as parties.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thanks for hearing us.
Dean, anything? You're next.
Yes, that was sort of what Mr. Constance said, wondering if there were issues or changes that you would want to see this resolution on Tuesday on. Wonderful. So last time.
That was the one that was introduced on the 8th of May. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same.
Oh.
So conditions 1 and same went before, but 5 and changed a little bit.
Let's bring it up and look at it.
I remember.
Tim and I will look at it, we'll collectively tell you,
Thank you.
please change paragraph 3 or whatever we find. Huh?
If you would, please.
We can wait on the table Tuesday.
We'll take in the load off.
We'll
you.
work with him.
It'll be an S version.
They said they would,
Tuesday at 4 is okay?
they said they would get it to us by Monday.
Thanks, man.
If you guys are gonna go to that park, you guys gonna get minimum wage there, or you're on your own time?
We're taking you with us.
Oh, well.
Jan Coffee never gets minimum wage.
He has his
Neither
own
does Tim
minimum.
Potter.
This is all
Neither
pro
does
bono
Tim
on my part.
Potter.
He has his own minimum.
Yeah, him and Tim
Thank you,
both.
gentlemen.
Out of my price range.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were talking about enforcement, and this is going to be an extremely important part of this whole deal, because we already realize that if we don't have enforcement, then we're not going to make much progress, because then we got the good and bad operator situation. So what I'm thinking is we have another class graduating from APD real soon. We're going to have more guys on the streets. Let's set up a special unit to go check on this. I mean, a couple of officers could probably check 30 stores in a day, couldn't they? I mean,
I think this could be something the CAP team works with.
Right, and that's how we did it when we had the Spirits
Tap
problem.
team suggested a good idea.
well, maybe they need to add another person or two to the cap team so they have
I
enough people to
tried.
handle this. Huh?
I got shut down on
I'll
that.
call Jack and see.
Okay, if you would, Andy, thank you.
Just an idea.
Chris?
Yeah, we also want to tie it to code enforcement, right? Because we tend to devolve these kind of questions to code enforcement, who's chronically understaffed and doesn't have a huge force.
He's only complaint driven too.
Right, and so I think we would want to make a bridge between the code enforcement and the APD, whomever is doing these enforcement processes, and we want to make it very rational.
Anything else? Yes, Mr. Dyson.
I guess I don't understand what you're expecting the cops to go do. We'll walk around, look at the bottles. I mean, if they're gonna do it, they've gotta be there undercover observing who is buying and who is misusing, and that's not 30 in a day, and so on. So I don't see that. And my early example is absolutely flawed, or idea, that is having it based on complaints. I can tell you in housing, competing landlords will call complaints, and call the cops
Against each other.
on the other outfit, and tenants who recognize that drug deals are going down or hookers are working there, you know, when they call the cops, pretty soon the landlord comes around and says, "You're out of here. We don't want anybody that living here filing complaints," because it gets the landlord in trouble and he starts paying for calls. And it's a flawed system. Great idea of a flawed system. Yeah, and I don't need to say this to you guys, but Eisenhower said wisely, don't let pursuit of the perfect keep you from doing what's important. And my view is that doing nothing is not a good option.
Right.
And we are not going to do it perfectly, and we'll need to be very vigilant and responsible to come back and see what we've done and what its record is, and make the course adjustments. Sorry, I'm preaching.
But doing the nothing we've been doing doesn't get us anywhere either. And that's the problem, Fred.
That's what I just said.
I know.
Okay, you're saying amen.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right.
Can I just?
Amy?
So in the past, the CAP team has been used for compliance issues. Specifically, the examples Francis brought up, Spirits of Alaska. The CAP team was, they actually did set up and they took video for a number of days of what was going on around that establishment, who was going in and out. So they have a history of sometimes going to the hotspots.
Yeah, and video cameras are extraordinarily valuable. We might want to require the troublesome operators, you know, to have a video camera, that we can see who their traffic is. That's a pretty good idea.
I know Francis
Chris?
and Q, but with Spirits of Alaska, it was the neighbors who put up cameras.
So did APD.
Yeah, but the neighbors created a real record, and then APD's like, oh, we got to do this.
Yeah,
So,
APD.
and that's they caught a rape on camera. They caught all kinds of horrible stuff when that went down.
Yeah, great idea.
Francis?
I guess first, I stand by everything that I've said here. Those were based on my experiences and what people have said to me. And so I just I don't feel, I know it seems like some of the things I said came out a little in front of things, but I feel like it was on firm ground with the statements I made.
Yeah, I'm just saying there was no assembly record saying that people inside Spirits of Alaska were selling drugs. There was clearly some issues outside in the parking lot. So I just wanted to make it clear in the hearings that I sat in, that was not found to be.
Fair.
And I'll add to that, what I have on video, I have the video still, is an individual who worked there coming outside to deliver drugs. And so it wasn't quite over the counter, it was like bellhop service, but, you know, it was really damning to see that going on.
My whole point is, we don't need to devolve into arguing.
Yeah.
My whole point is, when we're sitting in an assembly committee meeting, to make assertions that this was found in this was just a fact. I sat in the hearings for Spirits of Alaska. It wasn't a finding of the assembly.
You're not the only one who sat in the hearing.
I know.
I did too.
I know.
So
Francis, to continue, sorry.
yeah,
sir.
I mean, you know, if mom and pop liquor store was a good operator, then they wouldn't be before you today. And you know, all this sort of discussion is anecdotal or not. If you take your family to dinner at Campobello's, or if you go to the European grocery store, then I think you'll get a sense of the concerns that the community council has. And in my own personal experiences, the article that was in the newspaper a year or two ago was fair and was not making a bigger issue than actually does exist. If anything, it understated things. Now, the CAP team, they are very good at investigating criminal activity, and I think, been working on alcohol issues for 8 or 9 years, had a lot of interactions with the CAP team. And what I think I recall them saying, if I didn't read it somewhere else, from someone that was experienced with dealing with these alcohol issues, is that the street inebriates will pool their money to go buy larger pools of alcohol and find ways around some of these rules that you might. So so I guess what governs is what Mr. Dyson said, that what you come up with if you do take action or pass some new laws. It may get you 80% there, 90% there, or 50% there, but these are tough issues to deal with through new regulation. What it comes down to is the operator.
Anything else before we end this meeting? Because I think we've chewed the fat as much as we can. Anything else? This meeting's over with. Thanks for being here.